Let me introduce our first guest, Angela Mahoney. Angela?
Hi, my name is Angela Mahoney. You can find me on Twitter at iCloud. And you want me to give a fun fact about myself? I've been in the Salesforce world forever, so I kind of feel like a lot of people have seen my name or I've asked them to do something for one of my organizations.
All right. I was thinking you were going to say something along the lines of, I had like cats but no, you have been in the SF ecosystem for a really long time.
I have. And I'll give a fun fact. I'm an identical twin, which some people know and some don't. And it made me realize how small the world is, starting when we went to college together. But I walked in when I lived in Minnesota to my new job, and somebody threw her arms around me and said, "It is so nice to see you," because she had worked with my twin in Minnesota at the Smithsonian. So I thought, whoa, wait a minute. She's everywhere. People are everywhere.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
She's not in
also
Salesforce, so my domain.
yet, right?
Yet, yeah. I keep telling
You're
her, come
working
over
on
to the
it.
dark
No.
side. Yeah. Yeah.
And our second guest today is Amber Boaz. Amber, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Amber Boaz. I'm Amber9904 on Twitter. And for those of you in the know, the 9904 is a big, huge secret. Huge secret. It's not. You just have to ask me. And I have known Kevin since 2008, since before he had kids, since before he was married to his lovely wife. And the way we met was that he came to my office looking for a rubber band. And I had a rubber band ball in my desk, and I said, "Here, just have the whole ball of rubber bands." And he thanked me, and we've been friends ever since.
Pretty much exactly like down to the wording, exactly what happened. So, a little bit of housekeeping today. We're going to be talking about recruiting for good. Now, for those of you who are tuning into recruiting for good for the first time, this is our project here to walk through building an application from the idea all the way through packaging. So, the idea is to build a recruiting application on Salesforce. The packaging part, we nowhere near, but in the meantime, we're doing all of the stuff that you would do if you were going to build an application on the Salesforce platform, including have meetings with stakeholders. So last week we had a subject matter expert in recruiting come and talk with us, and we learned all about sort of the processes and steps, the things that are necessary for a recruiting application to actually function and do what a recruiter needs it to do. And I sort of had my mind blown when we covered the fact that there's recruiting in terms of like I'm going to recruit somebody to go augment the staff of this company, and there's also recruiting this I'm going to help somebody hire somebody permanently for this position. And I had only ever thought about the permanent hire situation, so having that expand out there was very important. This week I've got two hiring managers here. Both of them have been in the Salesforce ecosystem for a very long time, and we're going to be talking to them about what a hiring manager needs a recruiting application to do. Okay, so we're going to be exploring that in conversation. And when I brought that up in talking to Amber and Angela, one of the things they mentioned was, Kevin, were you hungry when you wrote this? Because I had spelled stakeholder. Helps if I actually spell it right. I had spelled it this way, which is interesting, but not exactly what we're looking for. So I'll say it's stakeholder spelled that way. And in response to that, Amber posted this lovely picture. My favorite stakeholder is a fork. That's my fun fact of the day. My favorite stakeholder is a fork. Um, and as we go into talking about what stakeholders mean, I just want to give you remind you all that a stakeholder is somebody who is responsible or a subject matter expert in a particular role or function, and they have sway over what our application does or does not do. So, just to throw this out there to our lovely guest today, what exactly does a recruiting app need to do to work for you as a hiring manager? Now, that's a really big question. Let's unpack that a little bit.
I was going to say everything, but you probably want something more specific.
Right. Yes. Um, let's start off by saying, as a hiring manager, what is the information you're looking for at the point in which you are trying to decide whether or not to interview someone?
Oh, you, I'll start. I would say there are two things I would like to know right off the bat. I think the biggest, easiest one, if you will, is does that candidate meet the majority of the qualifications that I'm looking for? I don't say all because I want to see a little bit more of a broader applicant pool, but do they meet a certain percentage of the qualifications that I think they have to have? The other one is I'd like a snapshot of how big our applicant pool is, how diverse the applicant pool is. Like, do we have 3 candidates? Do we have 10? Are they all men? Are they all women? Some kind of generic breakdowns.
Okay.
Yeah, and sorry, were you going to ask a clarifying question? Because I was going to jump on top.
Go for it.
All right. I think both of those things absolutely, because sometimes, you put a rec out there in the world and you expect to get 30 candidates in 6 weeks. I pulled those numbers out of the air, but you don't get that, or you get way more, which means either your job description is way too narrow or way too broad, or people are just throwing pasta against the wall to see what sticks. It's, but that is useful information to know how much time you need to you can afford to spend on each application. I also wanted to ask, are we with this big A application that's sitting on the Salesforce platform, are we asking folks to enter their information, or are we just taking the resume and parsing it?
It's a great question, and we actually have a internal project owner. His name's Alistair. Alistair has joined us for a previous session. And after we've had these conversations with the subject matter experts and we have the notes, then he and I are going to sit down and carve out what exactly the application does or does not do. I will say, so basically my response is we don't know yet.
TBD. Got it.
My gut reaction is to say that as a way of building this out on the platform and really, I'm going to use a business term. I feel like I should put a quarter in a box somewhere. To really leverage Salesforce as a platform, we'll probably use something like a Experience Cloud experience to allow people to look at and then apply for different job recommendations, different job recs.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So thinking about this from the candidate experience side, the last thing I as a candidate want to do is have to retype the contents of my resume into your application.
Right.
That makes me stabby. Kevin asked us not to curse, so I'm going to say stabby.
Thank you for that.
But if because here's fundamentally the thing, a resume is a marketing document. My resume is well formatted. It's flowerier. It's very yes, it has facts and figures on it, but it also has, frankly, some fluff. Whereas
you put some time into it to make it look good, right? And communicate who you want to be for that position.
Yeah, you're conveying some of your personality in there, right? Whereas an application, little a application, for a job is more transactional. It's more like a loan document or like it's a different. Right. And I want to say I read somewhere that it's also, you are representing yourself as this. And oftentimes in these types of things, there's a checkbox that says, I promise I haven't lied, or some legal equivalent. Mm-hmm. So, if I say I have a Bachelor of Science from Acme University, that is a thing that I am representing legally to the organization. And so that's a different thing. But my point being, from a candidate experience perspective, can we pull from LinkedIn? Can we pull from, so, I know you're not asking about, you're asking from a hiring manager perspective, but as a hiring manager, I want my candidates to not be already angry with my organization when they apply, if that makes sense.
It does. And I think the answer is probably maybe. To really nail it down and give a solid answer, there's a lot of technical stuff that goes into an integration with, say, LinkedIn.
Oh, sure.
But one of the things that I wanted to float past you as hiring managers is, what if we took the idea of a job rec and a resume and we sort of flipped them on their head? one of the things that Alistair and I have talked about, and on the live stream, the first one, was the idea of what if we took and we said, hiring managers, you need to write your job rec as a V2 mom. And for those of you who are like, what's a V2 mom? It's a organizational tool used by Salesforce that defines the vision, values, methods, obstacles, and measures for a particular person's job over the course of a period of time. And we use them internally to say, this year I'm going to work on these things, and they match the vision and values of the company in this way. And it's a very Salesforce way of looking at it. And as we talk about building a recruiting application on the Salesforce platform, one of the things that I want us to consider is, what would it look like to do recruiting and hiring in a different way? So as a, let's put your hiring manager hat back on. As a hiring manager, if instead of getting a resume, you got the flip side of that, you got a V2 me, a V2 mom for a person. My vision is to have a career doing developer advocacy, and my values are X, Y, and Z. Now I'm going to do this with the following methods, and I expect that these are the obstacles, and I expect to be measured by these measures. Now, that does sort of like raise the bar a little bit, because there's nothing to import. Like, you don't get that data from LinkedIn, right? But that it does turn around and sort of flip the script on what it looks like to do hiring and recruiting. And the reason we're sort of interested in this is because we really do want to focus our recruiting app here on the principles of diversity, equality, and inclusivity. So one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, and this goes back to something Angela said here, was, what does the candidate pool look like? She wanted to see some diversity metrics. What if we intentionally blinded hiring managers from those sorts of diversity metrics? So instead of being given, instead of handing you my V2Me that says Kevin Porman, my vision is to do developer advocacy, sort of that, what if we stripped everything out of there that might be considered demographic information and gave you candidate X, seeks to be a developer advocate, has the following values, so on and so forth. Where that sort of intentional work of hiding all of that demographic information from you, would that hinder your ability to determine whether or not you wanted to interview a person?
No, I think I actually really, really like that. And the reason I would want to see the aggregate stats on what the pool looks like is, I have to trust that my recruiter is doing the effort to make the applicant pool as diverse as possible. You always hire the best candidate for the role, but that being said, if you have a very non-diverse hiring pool, you're already shooting yourself in the foot. So that's why I'd want to see that. But I think with regards to who that actual candidate is, any diversity stats, I don't think that's important right there. Then I want to know what the person has done, or with this V2 mom idea, which I like and I don't like at the same time. I like it because it's future facing, which you don't see in resumes. Resumes are what I've done, not what I'm going to do. So I like that future looking piece, but it's, I want to know what they've done, what they're interested in doing, and what gender you are, what color you are is irrelevant.
Okay.
Yeah, same. I like the future facing bit, but I'm going to go back to the candidate experience. That's asking someone to create a net new artifact that they don't have on hand, right? As someone applying for jobs, I have my resume and I have at least the bare bones of a cover letter that I can tweak and modify if required by the ATS, right? The applicant tracking system. That would be, I would imagine, a barrier to entry for folks to spend the time creating that net new artifact. Maybe not. I would like to be wrong, but that I could see.
What if we did both?
Sorry?
What if we did both? What if we said, we want to help you develop a V2Me that is going to be forward-looking, and we also want you to give us your resume, whether that's a PDF or we pull something in from LinkedIn, to see what you've done before? The problem I have with accepting that resume and pulling that stuff from LinkedIn is it becomes very hard to blind the hiring managers to the demographic data if we're pulling that data in. So I understand the point about it being a barrier to entry, and I get that as somebody who has, you know, done has worked with recruiters to find jobs in the past. I understand that it seems like everybody wants, like, the first words you hear out of a recruiter's mouth are, "Hi, I have this interesting opportunity for you, and I found that you'd be really well fitted." And then the next thing they say is, "It's for this kind of work," and you're like, "I haven't done that in 10 years. Thank you." Then the third thing is they say, "Can you give us your resume in?" And they either want a PDF or they want it in Word format.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I get that. I want to lower the barriers to entry too for applicants. But I also, like, if we list our values for this project, do we prioritize the value of diversity, equality, and inclusivity, or do we prioritize the value of it's easy for people to use as candidates?
Well, I think if you, as an underserved population, am I going to be willing to jump through your hoops? Am I, like, this Acme Corp that has installed this, built this application, Acme Corp is using it. Am I, as a candidate, going to be willing to, I come back to candidate experience. As a hiring manager, I want my candidates to feel like it was a very smooth process. They were informed all the way around. They knew where they stood. They had feedback at the appropriate places, that they knew why it was that I felt like they didn't align with what I was after. Those sorts of things. And so, to be super clear, it's not that I dislike that idea. I just think it creates a barrier to entry.
So we have to figure out a way to hold these ideas in tension.
Yeah, I think maybe that's a step 2, right? Like, send us your resume. Great, you're in the system. We will get back to you. Okay, I do a first pass. As a hiring manager, I do a first pass at all the resumes. Okay, great. Thank you so much. We're looking to narrow our pool down. Will you do this exercise for us? And that's the V2Me. And then that's a second filtering, if you will.
Yeah.
Potentially.
I think that's a good point, because when you're looking at your initial, your first interviews, being able to have the knowledge of does the candidate have the basic things. So, for example, when he or she enters the system, you can put all that information in, and maybe minimize what they need instead of a V2Me. Maybe pare it down a little bit, that they spend a little bit more time on the cover letter, because these days, in my experience, you don't necessarily need those anymore. Here's my resume. Here's my LinkedIn link, which is probably on my resume, and then you've basically said, here's who I am. But to put a little more emphasis on a mini V2Me, I don't think is asking too much. And then when you move that to the hiring manager, potentially for the first screen, you present the qualifications, the V2Me, and just the minimal things that they meet, so that the hiring manager can go through a basic representation.
If you can't, for technology reasons or desire reasons, parse my existing resume or my LinkedIn, to then on top of it ask me for the V2Me, I think is too much. If you have sucked all the information out of my LinkedIn and I just have to confirm that, yep, you got all the things, awesome. And then, okay, here are some follow-up questions at the V2Me, that I don't feel is onerous. Does that make sense, Kevin?
Yeah, and I really like the idea of being able to pull data from a resume, and then as stage 2 say, hey, we think you're qualified. We'd like you to fill out this V2Me.
Right.
I really do like that idea a lot, and I think that is a great way to hold those two ideas in tension. I think that we need to find a way to say your experience section, because that's what we care about in the resume, right, is their experience. It should be demographic information free. And I don't really think that's going to be a problem for things like LinkedIn, because when you're LinkedIn, it's company, start year, end year, what'd you do, right? Maybe a job title. Education is going to be very similar as well. Where, when, what'd you graduate with?
Well,
and so I think
yes,
that
but no.
Yeah.
Yes, but no, Kevin, because what happens if I went to an HBCU and I graduated last year? That means I'm young, and that means I'm probably Black. Now, does it
Yeah,
necessarily mean that? No, but right. But
that's
so
true.
like
Well,
the
check
fact
that
that
out.
I have a bachelor's degree in computer science, I think is enough,
Yeah, you're right.
Yep. I
right?
You're
agree
right. All right.
100%.
So we need to pull experience and education in a demographic.
Because the flip
Safe
side too, we
way.
always talk about somebody that graduated within the last couple of years, but also somebody that graduated 20 years ago.
Right.
You know, we have to watch ageism from both sides.
Yep.
So it's as
Yep.
important for the more seasoned population as well as the younger ones.
Yeah.
And career changers, right? You know, a couple of jobs ago, my boss, who was hired in as a VP in IT, was a nurse by training. She literally
Actually, that
had a
makes a lot of
master's in
sense.
nursing.
Yeah.
And she, well, because all IT is triaging and fixing stuff, right? Like that's nursing.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's bits and bytes.
Less blood. It's perfect.
Right, yeah. Blood, sweat, and tears in both. Viruses.
Places
you
this
know.
conversation I did not imagine it going.
You kind of knew what you were getting with the two of us.
Choose your audience.
Oh, totally. So, in summation of that, I hear from the two of you that, yeah, we probably can blind the hiring managers from demographic information, and that we should keep in tension the idea of candidate experience and being true to our DEI values. And I think that the two of you have really hit upon an idea in which we can do that in a progressive way. You know, we need to be able to parse LinkedIn or parse a PDF resume, one of those two things, in order to be able to pull this information out safely. But you know, that's all technical details related to how this works. So one of the things that it's been driven home to me, and as I'm doing research for this, is that sort of the best practices notion of recruiting and interviewing and hiring is that every single candidate who goes through the process for the same role should be treated exactly the same. They should be given the exact same process, the exact same steps, with very little variation. And by little variation, I mean nobody's going to be upset if you interviewed candidate A on Tuesday and candidate B on a Wednesday. That's not the kind of thing that matters. But the fact that they're going to have you know, initial submission of data to be in the system, and then say a V2Me setup, and then maybe a pre-screening questionnaire with a recruiter to, you know, make sure that everybody's understanding of salary and that sort of stuff is in the right range before moving on to possible interviews. What are the kinds of things as a hiring manager you want to be able to see, to visualize, or to understand about your pipeline of getting someone hired that covers that sort of information? Where in the process, and what do you think it might look like? So this is sort of the brainstorming side of things. As we get into this sort of thing, this is where crazy wild ideas are really welcome.
Yeah, hopefully the organization that installs this package has a hiring process that is ideally documented, and is somewhat standardized. I could see there being a way to, you know, based on the line items in a job description, look at a candidate, look at the job description and go, yep, they meet this one, they sort of meet that one, they don't really meet that one. Okay, next resume, next job description, kind of a scale of 1 to 5 or something. Because you're going to, you know, the reality of a hiring manager is you're going to get dozens of these, probably, unless your recruiter stinks. And so being able to go through them quickly with a standard rubric is important. But to your point about process, like once I have done that and I can see, okay, I have, you know, 3 out of, you know, I've got 100 applications just for the sake of math. 12 of them are pretty good based on that side-by-sideness of them. You know, what am I going to then do with those 12? Right. And so in an ideal world, then there would be a second round of review that is, you know, more diligent or more before you even get to, hey, can you come in or Zoom for an interview? Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of
Second round
envisioning
of
a Kanban thing after you go through Amber's piece
Yeah.
of, are the qualifications met? People will move through at different rates of speed. So I'd like to be able to easily see who's gone on to the second interview. Like they've spoken with me as the hiring manager. Maybe I want to do a team interview or a tech interview with somebody else. Is it scheduled? Where is it? And easily move the candidates through. And then when you get into the offer phase, not everybody's going to accept your offer. We know this. So, who are my backups? What's a quick, easy way to see that?
And
Would be
some of
very
those steps can happen in parallel,
Mhm,
right? It
mhm.
may be that you do a technical interview before a team interview or vice versa, right? From a recruiting perspective, it may be easier to schedule one over the other.
True,
because
true.
Vacations and holidays and reasons, right?
Right.
So it may
People
be
listen.
that, right. So some of those, I like the Kanban view for the linear, but some of this is going to be parallel or can be parallel. And so that's a tricky bit.
Yes, that is
interview
true.
wise.
That is true. When I think, when you're looking at different positions, to be able to flip between the different ones and see where my candidates are
Yep.
for those positions would be helpful.
Yep. Absolutely.
So maybe like a subway diagram where we can have,
Yeah.
step 1, step 2, step A, step B, step 3, where some things can be in parallel, other things are in a linear format, knowing that you have to accomplish the interviews before you can go on to making a decision, but that those
Mhm.
interviews can go in any order they want.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
Okay.
And then I don't know if this comes in here, feedback tracking from other people they've interviewed is really, really important to me. So in the past, it's generally come in the form of emails, like, okay, where's that email? Do I cut and paste it into my tracking system? Did I have time to do that? So being able to integrate the feedback internally on that candidate into my applicant record would be phenomenal.
How do you go ahead?
One of the things that's also useful is as you have, especially inexperienced interviewers, interviewing teammates potentially,
Mhm.
is that you give them a list of questions. Here, you, Angela, are going to be interviewing for team cohesion or
Right.
team fit. I kind of hate that, but is this a person you would want to work with? Here are some
Mhm.
questions you can or should ask, and then put your answers in the ATS. You're going to be interviewing for technical skills. Here are the 5 technical skills we need. Here are some ways to assess that. Okay,
Mhm.
go. So that it's, because the last thing I want as someone who just interviewed somebody is a blank text box with a blinking cursor and a yes or no question. Should we hire them? Like that's torture.
I like this person, send. Like, no.
Right. Like great communicators, send. Like not useful, not at all useful. So some guidance to interviewers who aren't the hiring manager, and that I, as the hiring manager, probably with my HR partner, can guide that group of humans on that interview journey. Because I'm not going to be in all of them. I can't.
Great idea.
I'm taking some notes here.
Yeah.
So this gets a little bit into the implementation weeds, but what if we had a system, or the system was enabled to allow someone, maybe that's the recruiter, maybe that's the hiring manager, to go through and pick from standardized questions. Okay, for the technical interview, I want you to ask these 5 things, and put that together and generate a quick doc that the hiring manager, the recruiter, and the interviewer can all participate on, that is tied to the candidate record for that role.
Cool.
To be able to see the question. It seems like that would get us a lot, but it might also introduce a place where bias could be brought in, because whoever's choosing those questions can greatly impact how the interview turns out. So what would you think about, how would you handle that?
Well, I think sorry, go ahead, Amber.
Just a point of clarity, from the bank of questions that are asked, or from the asker asking them perhaps improperly. I'm not sure I understand your.
Yeah, so imagine a system that is set up where, Amber, you can assign me to go interview candidate A, and you want me to do the technical interview. So you say, generate technical interview for interviewer Kevin. It's a button. You push that, and that gives you, okay, it's a 30-minute interview. We're going to get 5 questions in. Here are the 5 questions, and they're going to be pulled from, I can choose these 5 questions from a approved list of questions. And then say, okay, yeah, I want to ask this one. I want to ask this one. And then, we can even put it together as sort of like an interview script. So at the end,
Right.
we can ask to make sure to ask if they have any questions and that sort
Right.
of thing. If they ask about what their status is or what the time range is, here's what you can tell them, that sort of thing.
Yes, I think well, so let me say this. So many of the roles, and Angela, back me up here, I think, so many of the roles that we're hiring for, I'm not going to have a bank of questions because I just need, this is maybe even a one-off role.
Gotcha.
It's not, I need somebody very specific for a very specific thing.
Mm-hmm.
I need a documentation expert who knows CPQ inside and out and, is used to using Lucidchart. Like that's a very specific thing that, there isn't going to be a bank of questions about Lucidchart usage, right? Like,
it's true.
That's
true.
If we were hiring, for a call center, yes, absolutely, 110%, right? Because you need 60 people that all do roughly the same thing. But if you're hiring one, Angela's nodding.
So let me back up there. Instead of doing it that way, what if we said, when you generate the role, the job rec for a role, you have to establish the questions.
I like that. Yeah.
That way, every candidate is asked the same questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with having that bank for some of the positions. And it could be, how do you learn best, for example, probably appropriate for a lot of the positions that we hired for. But I wanted to address a point that you had earlier about introducing bias in those questions. Bias can be introduced anywhere. And I think there's an even greater chance if the person, if somebody's doing the interview and doesn't have experience conducting interviews, I think there's a greater chance that they can introduce bias because they don't know, being trained on what you can and cannot ask is not something that we've all had the luxury of doing. So there's a certain plus side to having a specific bank. But along those lines, some kind of statement at the bottom, remember we are an all inclusive, something that says we don't ask about this. Certain
but I think there's a difference between, you're not allowed to ask someone, if they're pregnant, like that legally you're not allowed, but you also,
shouldn't ask some things.
Right. There's just some stuff that like, maybe don't be a jerk about this. Right. Like,
right.
Those kinds of, and that I think is going to vary by organization. I mean, one would hope that there's kind of a standard, don't be a jerk language, but I think organizations are going to cover that differently and potentially even for different roles, right? If you're interviewing for a very customer facing role, you're looking for different things than if you are interviewing for a very heads down, bean countery type of role. Like those are, and so if the interviewer, like if you've got an extrovert interviewing an introvert for an introvert role, the interviewer can have their bias interjected in this of like, no, this guy's, like watching paint dry, but that's what we need for this job. Right. So it's also just kind of bias of, because humans are human. Right.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you can't eliminate, you can mitigate. How about that?
Yeah, I don't think let me be clear. At no point do I think that this is going to be a panacea that eliminates bias in the hiring process.
We're not fixing DEI.
No world peace out of this.
What I'm hoping what we can do is that we can make it better.
Yeah,
because
I get that. Yep.
How do I put this better is better? Yeah, I mean,
way to go out on a limb, Kevin.
Yeah. It's like, why would you want to make it better? Because it's better. Okay, so
that's on his V2 mom, right?
Make things better.
Better. Perfect.
How will you measure it? It is better.
It's better.
Yes. I mean, it's a measurement. It's completely subjective.
But we did it.
How do you feel about letting people having that sort of interview doc where the questions are locked, but then the interviewer can put their feedback there, but we can guide that feedback. So we can say, if the question is, how do you learn best? We can ask questions like, did the candidate express in a way in which they have determined how they learn best and provide a concrete answer? Or did they just fluff around and say they like learning? We can ask that sort of feedback in a very concrete way. Do you think that that would be a help or a hindrance to hiring managers who are looking at that feedback?
Ooh. My first, yeah, I'm making the same face. I should be making the same face Amber is. I hesitate at that. I don't necessarily want the people that I have assigned these interviews to judge how they answered the question. Did they do a good job? Did they clarify? I'm more interested in knowing, what did they say? I learn best when I'm, shut in a room with Trailhead and some loud music playing, not candidate expressed the ability to learn new things, which is kind of what I heard you saying. I'm not interested in that. I want to know the answer.
Yeah, I do want. I do want to know the answer too. I guess I don't want to say like candidate said that. No, I'm
Mhm.
looking for. What I want to know is, did the candidate concretely answer the question? Like, I learn best when I'm locked in a room with music and Trailhead, or did they say, well, I like learning in a variety of different ways? One of those is a non-answer answer, and the other one is a concrete answer. And my question is there a way that we can sort of guide the feedback that the interviewers are giving to get us to, did they provide a concrete
Okay.
answer? Yes, here's what their answer is.
I mean, you could say, how do you learn? And then we're looking for the candidate to specifically say things so that you guide the interviewer to what they're listening for. I
Okay.
What
that's
what
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 I
we
hear you
don't
saying.
what we don't want to do. I mean, there's a fine line between scripting and guiding an interviewer, right? Like, I don't want to ever script an interview unless I'm hiring for something where I need 400 people yesterday and my turnover is 50% a month, right? Like, then at that point it's just transactional. Like, do
That's
you have a pulse? Can you do the thing, right?
that's some
Um,
questions about management right there.
I'm questionable. Um, but the what you don't want to turn this question bank into is a personality test or a,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
like, this should not feel like the SATs for either the interviewer or the interviewee, right?
So what would you say to some of the feedback to the interviewer seeing a question for them to answer, which would be something like, um, did the candidate provide a concrete answer? If so, what was it?
I think specifically for the how do you best learn? Yeah, absolutely. But a lot of the questions are going to be like, tell me about a time you managed conflict in a team, right? Tell me about, well, and you can answer fuzzily for that. So maybe that's not a great example, but some of it's going to be more, the only word I can come up with is ethereal, but that's not the right word. Wishy, touchy feely,
I mean,
soft.
But I think, when you're carrying
it
out the interview, you're typically writing down what the person says. And then I would hope that the person that's doing the interview, not the interviewee, not the candidate, but the person that's writing down the notes would then review before hitting send, write down the notes because it's easier that way. You don't have to think, you
Right.
just write. And then, hey, as part of your review process before, here are some things that we're looking for. Specificity, for example, in how they answered it. Something like that. And that goes to more training rather than what the actual tool is like.
Right.
Does this person know what they're doing? And in my experience, at least, the people that I will choose to do those interviews are awesome people because I'm also selling the company. Is the
Right.
candidate selling themselves to me? I'm selling the company to them because in our experience, they're going to have other offers.
Yep.
okay.
So
So maybe this is a thing that we don't want to invest time in. My my theory, my idea for walking down this path was to say that, while ideally we would pick people who are good interviewers to be doing these interviews,
mhm.
um, in my experience, it's Tuesday, so it's Bob, um,
Right.
and I would rather Bob have some sort of idea of not what we're looking for in an answer, but things for what should they be looking for to tell us as
Mhm.
the person giving the feedback. Um, and I don't know that this is ever feedback that we would then give to the candidate. Like, you didn't say how you learn. You said that you like to learn. That's not the kind of thing, the feedback that we would want to give the candidate. But whether or not they said, specifically, I learned best in this. Was it a specific answer? Um, may be
Mhm.
important. I think that could be beneficial as feedback to the candidate and to the hiring manager. Yeah. So
I think I'll just reiterate, I think it's more important that I, as the hiring manager, make that determination
okay.
because I have more experience rather than having the interviewer make that determination. But I can read what the interviewer wrote and make my own assessment because I'll also be seeing probably various interviews for that position across different interviewers that I've assigned it to. So I'll be able to judge is the wrong word, but I'll be able to evaluate how each candidate did on the same question based on what the interviewers wrote.
That's fair. Okay. All right. So at the very bare minimum, that requires more thought. What are some other things you would like to see as a hiring manager in what Amber called an applicant tracking system, or an ATS, or what we're generally calling the recruiting system?
I need to be able to know where a given candidate is in the process, and kind of an aggregate where we are with hiring for a position. You know, what, I'm going to say this out loud, and I hate myself already. What the pipeline looks like. it's like a reverse pyramid.
Okay, Amber. I think you owe the box a quarter too.
I do. At least.
So you want to know?
I need to
at
be
a
able to.
glance.
I need to be able to search for Sally and know where she is in the process. But I also need to know, given this position, where are we in the process? Are we going to have somebody by the end of November, or are we not? Also, I'm going to add complexity. Oftentimes, you're hiring more than one candidate for. You have two recs with the same job description, right? And so you are hiring two people for the same role,
right?
And so tracking that as well.
Great point. And when you start getting to the end of the process, I need to easily be able to see when their start date could be. Do you give 2 weeks notice? Do you want a week off? Are you 4 weeks out? Because sometimes, especially in that scenario where you have multiple open positions with the same candidate base, you'll make your offers based on availability as well.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I mean,
that's especially true.
Part of me that. Go ahead.
I was going to say that's especially true if you are working with a candidate base that is likely to have visa considerations.
I feel like you just said a couple of words there that opened up a whole new box of cans of worms.
It does. Yeah, it totally does. Yeah. The fact that folks' ability to live where they live is tied to where they work, their ability to start when your business needs them to may not align, and that potentially puts you at odds with your DEI goals.
Yeah, I'm torn because I like the idea. If I was a hiring manager, I would want to know when people could start. But I also know that I don't want that to drive me away from hiring the best person for the role. And I don't know.
I don't think it's a binary thing. I don't think it's an either or. That's a consideration thing. If I have the perfect candidate, but they can't start until 2 weeks after I need them, I'm going to suck it up, buttercup, right? Yeah. Like, I'm just going to make it work. So it just depends on.
But if you get a project starting, in 3 weeks, and you need a body, and you've got to, you'll hire to get that done. But if you might decide I can wait on the other one, we've got more flexibility. But I do know that I have an immediate business need. I've got to do that.
Right.
And hopefully you've got a candidate pool that supports that.
Right.
Okay. I don't even really want to go into visa considerations right
now. You really don't. No, that gets real hairy real quick.
Yeah.
And it depends on the size of the organization. It depends on, there's a lot there that I don't pretend to understand, but it matters.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a Cody take the wheel situation.
Quick, get me a lawyer.
So if you were designing the system, how would you want to see that you are hiring multiple people for the same role? Would you like it to boil down to the top, if you're hiring three, the three that are furthest along and best qualifications? What would you want? How would you want that to be visualized and available to you?
I'm
It depends.
I'm defaulting. What'd you say, Amber?
So it depends.
Yeah, I know.
It depends on how desperate I am, frankly.
Depends.
It,
Okay,
well,
I
Amber.
see.
Depends on how desperate
Yeah.
I am.
yeah, put that in there. That's cool. I don't mind
Let's face
it.
it, in this day and age, there's still chronically not enough people to fill the positions, and then with people changing jobs a lot, it's the hiring manager position is unenviable. So there's a certain level of desperation there. I think, you know, in one of those scenarios where at some point you have to say, like, this candidate is for this particular rec, this candidate is for this particular one, even if it's the same, you know, same position ultimately that they're going to go to. But being able to filter, so I'm you know, I think lookups, I think solutions right away, but being able to filter what is my entire candidate pool for this job. You know, and then we filled one rec, but I think I'd want to see everybody, because then I can figure out how to slot them in. Like, maybe this rec has a start date of January. This one can be a little bit more flexible. So then that's where I look at when is the person available, and can eventually slot them in. So to me, it doesn't, in this scenario, it doesn't get that finite until you're towards the end and you've distilled your candidate pool down to the cream.
And you're literally negotiating offers.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you may have a senior candidate and a junior candidate for the same rec. You know, you're going to have to pay the senior candidate more, as well you should. But, you know, finance says you can't because of until quarter's over, whatever. And so you hire the junior candidate now, and you tell the senior candidate, we can start you in mid-December. Is that okay? And they go, yep, I want to take time off anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
Right. But those conversations and that, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul kind of with finance and HR and, you know, oh, okay, well, what if we moved this position up a quarter and this position back a quarter? Maybe I don't need a QA person right now. I need a BA right now. And we can, you know, I'm going to get them both anyway in the next 90 days, but maybe I just swap them out because money, candidate pool, whatever.
This just got a lot more complex.
Oh, I know. This is why you invite us on these calls. You're welcome.
I mean, we did want, you know, subject matter experts to be stakeholders. And I'm this. I mean, this is good to know, because this is the kind of thing. I mean, honestly, this is exactly why I wanted to do this entire project this way, because I chose a subject domain, recruiting, that I know absolutely nothing about, and I assume, I feel like it's a given that anytime you sit down and you decide to build an app for something, there's going to be some point along the way where you stop and go, there's a whole realm of things I hadn't considered because I didn't know about them. And, you know, this is when we have to stop and think about that. So one of the things I'm trying to reduce down what you said to a bullet point, and that is a way to shuffle hiring and starting dates based on external, i.e. finance, limitations over all your roles. So if you're hiring for a QA, a business analyst, and an engineer, you need to be able to say, okay, well, I can only do the engineer at this rate now, and then in the next quarter I can hire the QA and the business analyst, or vice versa. I can do the business analyst and the QA, but not the engineer here. So let's be able to reach out to them and see when their prospective start dates are, to see whether or not those just magically align, or if we need to, you know, reach out and say, hey, do you want to start 3 weeks later than we talked about before?
But it's also, yes, all of that, but it's also true that it's not just start date, right? I was interviewing a group of candidates for a consulting role. And one of the candidates would have been great as a consultant, but he would have been even better as a salesperson. And I was not the hiring manager for that role. So while I'm interviewing this guy, I'm back channeling with the hiring manager for the salesperson role, going, this is not my guy, this is your guy. And so the candidate, so, you know, I had to, and he was hired and he's coming per usual. But like that, I don't know how you do that with software, right? Like I literally just said, this is, this is not the right guy for me. Well, actually, it would have been amazing for me, but he's going to be better for you, and I know you need that worse.
Would there
So it's
be
forced training
a
across hiring managers.
Yeah, I mean, you have to like
So-
close them down in that one rec and open them up
Yeah,
in another, clone them. And I want to go back a little bit before. So I'm more interested if we go back to when you're hiring a consultant. It seems like many companies out there are hiring multiple consultants at once, and that's where it's helpful as a hiring manager to look at, if let's say I've got 3 open roles, 8 great candidates. If I can get a senior unicorn, awesome. Then I can hire 2 juniors, or maybe I get 3 mid-levels. There's a certain element where you just kind of stare at them and go like, all right, how can I put together the best team? That's what I want to do, because I want to make teams that rock. So I need to look at them all like, oh, you've got great CPQ, but you basically wrote the book on Sales Cloud. What does the business need? So I'd like to see those, those pieces. And you've got mentoring experience. You've got to grow. You want to grow in this area because you told me in your V2 meet. How can I, sprinkle all those herbs together to make the best dinner possible, to use a cooking term? I don't know if that works.
That sounds like something that a tool can at best hope to facilitate, but not actually do.
Yeah,
Yes.
because
Yes.
you can never remove. There's never going to be a formulaic, programmatic way to do this. It's people. So you have to have people.
Yeah.
The
hard part about this, Kevin, the hard part about this is always going to be people.
Yeah.
Always.
The best and worst of technology.
Right. Yep.
So if we just say we're trying to facilitate
Tears of joy,
that,
right, Kevin? Tears of joy.
Again, Cody, take the wheel. If we think about how to facilitate that,
Mm-hmm.
and I think about this in a very, I'm not trying to solution anything, but I am thinking about how I would want to visualize it. It almost seems like there might be a way for us to facilitate an understanding of a job recs or a V2 mom's required skills against a candidate's shown skills or demonstrated skills in a way that we might ultimately be able to provide a color gradient to. So red to green, or maybe blue to yellow, whatever color scheme we come up with, where the more it is towards one, the more they fit that V2 mom better. And then we could surface a visualization that had, candidate A is orange, candidate B is purple, and allow you to situate those and see in relation to a role how these people do or do not meet your requirements in a way that might allow you to visualize and identify, okay, well, I'm going to take candidate A and candidate D because together they'll make a team that'll cover what I need. Does that make sense? Is that, pie in the sky? Is that?
I think that's pie in the sky. And the reason I say that is because people don't fit in buckets that nicely.
I think only at the beginning of the process.
Right. Early on, you may be able to bucket people into, Myers-Briggs, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But once you get into later in the process, that's a different beastie.
Yeah, take away the colors. Don't do it.
Yeah.
No colors. Okay.
No. I mean, the potential to rank on our side, this is my dream list.
Yeah.
Yes. At some point I will get to that because I will have to make a decision on who I extend an offer to. But, before that, once they hit are they worthy of an interview? I think after that, it's who they are as a person, how the interviews go. And it goes beyond qualifications and, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, in my experience.
So I think
no buckets.
Yeah, I think you almost have, there's almost 2 applications here, Kevin, and I'm sorry to say this to you. One is, how do we take input?
5 minutes, Amber.
I know. How do we take input from humans on the internet and put it in a format that can be quickly parsed by decision makers?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, okay, given the parsed list, how do we action that with interviews and softer, fuzzier stuff? And we spent the first half of this call talking about that, dealing with the onslaught of applications for a given rec. Now we're getting into the weeds of, okay, you've got 6 people. Yeah. How do you, in your brain, you have ranked them. You may not have written it down, but in your brain you have, because you're human and that's what humans do. But then how do you action that appropriately and within a transparent process? And that, I don't know that you can code that.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Challenge
That-
Nor
accept.
should you.
No,
Nor should you.
no, I get it. I get it. We don't want to. I mean, the last thing I want this application to do is to, sort of bucket people into, square people into round holes and,
Right.
and then pass that off as a good fit. And so I think this is, again, a valuable conversation to have to draw attention to, hey, we don't want to do any kind of bucketing after we've started talking to a real life person. And so I think, I don't know that it's two applications. Although
I was being slightly facetious, but it's two very different functions. It's
Right.
making sense of the chaos at the front end, and then once you've made sense of the chaos, it's people to people.
Yeah.
yeah. And so part of this might be
yeah.
let me sort of flip the script again. What if knowing that we don't want to codify that interaction with a real person, what if what we did is we tried to provide training to the interviewers? I see Amber nodding, but Angela's like,
Well,
What's the goal? Because what's the goal of training for the interviewers?
you had to go and ask the hard question.
well, so I think there's a couple goals. I'm with Kevin on this one. I'm backing you up here.
Convince me.
I think there's a couple things. One is, here are the things you legally can't ask. The second is, here's how we interview here at Acme Corp. Here are the kinds of things we're looking for. And then there's also, because chances are, if you're the hiring manager, you're picking the interviewers.
Yeah.
Here's interviewer, what I'm looking for you to help me gather. Here's the
Okay,
information.
so I'm totally on board with that. I think that's actually really great. I understood it, misunderstood maybe, interviewing or training the interviewers in the context of how can we automate more. So I reacted to that.
No.
Okay, so general training, I think.
Okay.
Gosh, that's always good, because again, it goes back to, as a company, we're also selling to the candidates. As much as we like to think that we're their only company, we're not in most cases. So I want to put my best foot forward as well, and training is a great thing.
Yeah. Well, and in all of this, Kevin, the candidate needs to see where they are in the process and where the process is in its entirety, right? You're at interview 2, and we are still interviewing candidates until at least next Thursday or whatever. We will have, that kind of thing.
Now, if there's a way to automate that through email, here's why. I don't want to make candidates jump through hoops of, I'm here, so I have to log in and create my username here for something that I'm never going to, if I don't get the job, I'll never use it again, but there I've got an email out. So to make it, and I don't know the answer to this, and that's why I defaulted to email, because email is easy. I'm a little resistant to having somebody create a login for every position.
Well, if they're going to have already logged in order to apply, they have to. Right? It's the push instead of pull, right? Maybe it's up to the candidate to decide. Do you want us to email you status updates on this application, or do you want to come and log in and look at them?
What if we?
True, because there's somewhere you just turn it in like a web to lead, for example, and like
right,
boom,
it's like, here is my stuff.
happens.
Like, if I make it into the second round, then I'll start to care. Because as a candidate, you can't get emotionally invested in every application you put out there. You can't. You will die a slow and painful death. And so,
But
yeah.
So what if we spun up a outward-facing customer Slack channel when you submit your thing, and then we can say, okay, we want you to put your V2Me in. We're gonna guide you through the process on Slack. Hey, great, you're now to the point where the hiring manager is going to determine whether or not they want to interview, and as it turns out, the hiring manager decided to leave the company, so we're not hiring anybody right now. Or, yes, the hiring manager has decided to ask you to be an interview. Click here to try and find a time when you're available. And that kind of, guide it through. Amber's like,
I think if you choose, do you prefer Slack? Do you prefer text, email, login?
Yeah, I don't think it's
sure.
fair. Yeah.
Sure, but given the fact that we have 52 weeks to build this, we're ultimately going to pick one.
Okay, all right.
God, Kevin.
Fair enough.
We're such slackers.
So I think,
wow, I hadn't even thought of that. That's awesome.
So I think, given that, I think email is probably going to be your best. Here's where, folks are going to have to log in to apply if they want to log in and see their where they are in the where they're in the process, they can. But when things change, we shoot an email to all the candidates. Here's what's changed. I think that's going to be. I appreciate where you're trying to go with Slack, but I don't. It's not.
Not everybody uses it yet.
Yeah, everybody's got an email address.
Fair. Okay. Well, at this point, we have hit time for the day. I want to thank both Amber and Angela for joining us today. We've had a great conversation on what a recruiting app needs to do from a hiring manager's perspective. Thank you both for your time. We will be editing this document, and it'll be available in the show notes for this particular stream. This stream will be available for, near as I can tell, the future, and you'll be able to go back, replay this, look at the notes, and see what we talked about. If you have questions, comments, or snide remarks, feel free to leave them there in the YouTube comments section. It's the only comment section on the internet I read, so that may or may not be a good thing. But thank you all for tuning in, and we will see you all next Wednesday for the next installment of Recruiting for Good. Bye-bye.